Alright guys, we are going to do a little bit of recap on similar figures. So I know we started last week on them, and you should be seeing it this week in your math class if you haven't already. But I figured we'd do a little recap before I let you off on your own to practice this skill. So the first thing we want to remember about similar figures are similar figures have the same shape but different sizes, okay? So I remember we did the apples. We talked about the apples where one was bigger, one was smaller, same shape, but one's a different size. In order for two figures to be similar, they have to have two things, okay? They've got to have congruent angles, and they have to also have proportional sides. Okay, so those are two things we have to check for every single time that we are determining whether two figures are similar. If they have congruent angles, so their angle measures are the same, and then if they have proportional sides. So we're going to go ahead and test it out with this first problem. Number 2 says, are these triangles similar? First thing we want to look for is the congruent angles. So if you look here, we've got, they're facing the same way. So we know that this angle, K, corresponds to this angle, E, and then they're both 40 degrees. Then we've got L corresponds to F, which just means they're in the same spot, and they're both 70 degrees. And then G corresponds to M, and they're also both 70 degrees. So all of my angles that match up, all the corresponding angles are congruent. So we could say, yes, it meets that qualification, but we're not done determining whether or not it's similar. Now we have to do a proportion. All right, so we're going to do small to big like we did last week. And we can take, there's 3 measurements on each, but you can take any 2. Plus, there's 2 that are the same, so you want to actually make sure that you are using the 2 different numbers. So 2 on the little, or the small, matches up with 4 on the big. And then we go back to the little 1, matches up with 2. So when you cross and multiply, 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 1 is also 4. So we'd say, yes, those are proportional sides. So it meets both criteria. Yes, these are similar figures, but it has to meet both of those criteria. Okay? And remember, these two triangles are isosceles because they have two sides congruent. All right, let's look at the next one. The next one says triangle ABC is similar to triangle XYZ. So it's asking what's the measure of angle Z. Now you see that they're not facing the same way. One is rotated, but that's fine. We can still line up the letters. So we're looking at ABC similar to XYZ. So remember we talked about if we look at the letter placement, Z is the last letter. It's in the same place as C. So here's Z. And here's C. They're going to be the same measure because just like we just said up at the top, similar figures have congruent angles. So C is 37. Z also has to be 37 degrees just because they're in the same letter placement. You could look at the picture too and determine that Z is in the same spot, but it's even easier to look at the letters. And then we would say, how do we know? Well, I just said when I went to the top. How do we know? We know because similar figures have congruent angles. Okay? So because C and Z, actually let's say I have congruent corresponding, that's even better, angles that are congruent. Sorry guys, that would be the more better statement. Good. If you need to pause at any time to think about it for a second, that's totally fine. Or if you need to pause and ask me I don't understand something, again, totally fine. Because this is just a recap. So number 4 says quadrilateral HIJK is similar to WXYZ. Fill in the missing angle measures for WXYZ. So again, same thing. If we line up the letters HIJK, and then we've got right on top WXYZ, those letters on top will match. So that means that whatever W is, H has to be the same. Whatever X is, I has to be the same. And whatever J is, Y has to be the same. Whatever K is, Z has to be the same. So let's start with W. W and H. So H is 100, so W also has to be 100 degrees. Notice that the figures are rotated. Looking at I and X. I and X have to be the same. J and Y. J is 100, so Y's got to be 100. and then Z and K. K is 80, so Z has to be 80. And to go one step further, this is a parallelogram, so the opposite angles are congruent. 80 and 80, 100 and 100 adds up to 360 degrees. Okay. Oh, one of my sides got a little cut off. This side here is 5. Okay, so the next one, we're just finding the missing side. Remember, when we do this, again, we're going to do small to big or little to big or big to small, however you want to do it. And we're going to set up a proportion to find x. Again, there's 3 numbers on this one. On each triangle, you only need to use 2. Just make sure you use the x. So I'm going to start with the x. The 15 on the small corresponds to the x on the big. Then we'll go back to the small, and you can use 5 or 10. I'm going to use 5 because it's smaller. And 5 is the height of the triangle, and it corresponds to 10. If you wanted to use the bases, 10 and 20, that's totally fine as well. So then you'd cross multiply. 15 times 10 would be 150 equals 5x, 5 times x. And then we're going to divide by 5 on both sides. And you should get 30 for that missing side, which is right here. Okay, should be pretty straightforward. If you don't get it, raise your hand. Okay, number 6. This one's a little bit tricky, actually. Not tricky, but it just you just have to listen, and then it'll totally make sense. So it asks you to give the large triangle side length so that the 2 triangles are similar. And remember, sides are proportional. So we have to give this triangle a side length that would be proportional, a side length and a base that would make it proportional to this. So if you think about it, we've got the height over the base. Okay, height over base. If I choose any number times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6, any number, you can choose to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by, but it has to be the same number. So you can choose times 2, you can choose times 3, you can choose times 4, but whatever you do to the top, you got to do to the bottom. And that is how you're going to find your new missing sides, so that it would be similar, because similar figures are proportional. This is called a scale factor, whatever number you're multiplying by. We don't really need to know that, but I want you to pick a number, and then when I come around to check when you get to the back, I will double check that this one, that you made side lengths that are proportional. Okay, so you're just picking any number that you can multiply both of them by, and then it should, whatever numbers you get, you should cross multiply to see if it is proportional. And you've got 2 left. The next one, number 7, triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEF. So same thing, I'm going to line them up, A, B, C, and D, E, F. So it asks for side BC. Let's look, here's BC. EF is in the same spot as BC. Okay, and then it asks for angle C. Angle C would correspond to angle F. We're just looking at the letter placement. Okay, so same thing with 8. If triangle ABC is similar to triangle ADE, then fill out the following proportion. You can certainly use the picture. AB, this long side, is similar to AD, the short side. It's a little triangle inside of a big triangle. Okay, so we're going big to little on this one. Okay, so then it's like, well, what matches on the big with AE? Well, AC does. But if you don't see that, line up your letters. Okay, and we're looking for what's the same as AE. AE here, AC. AE, AC. Okay, so you can kind of confirm it with a picture. Sorry, it's really hard to write on here, and this one we don't need. Okay, so then you're looking at BC. What is the same as BC? It's the base on the big. Well, the base on the small is DE. BC here, DE matches up. So pictures or words, whichever one is better for you. Okay, so if you need to go back and watch anything again, feel free. I try to keep these videos under 10 minutes, but you're going to go to the next page, which is all you try, okay? So I will come around and check, and if you need help, I will be able to assist you. But when you finish this, you will work on the graded assignment reflection, okay? Awesome job, you guys. Keep it up.